the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. My name is Brian, and I am here with Alison. And
hello.
And this is today we're going to be debunking feminism. The title of today's show is "The Truth About Initiatives to Get More Women into STEM Fields." We're going to be looking at a few studies that came across Alison's desk regarding women in STEM. So put your thinking caps on.
Well, actually, no.
No?
You need to pick up your sledgehammers because we're about to smash some patriarchy. And by that, I mean some patriarchy conjecture. Not the actual patriarchy, as envisioned by feminists, which doesn't actually exist, but the nonsense that does exist, envisioned by feminists. So, got those sledgehammers ready?
Yeah.
Because this is the good stuff, guys. This is the good stuff. And the reason why I say that is one of the strongest pillars of patriarchy superstition is that women are being discriminated against in the job market. It's specifically in STEM fields. You know, everybody trots that, well, every feminist trots that out as evidence of patriarchy, the absence of women in STEM. And now we have rock solid evidence that that very critical pillar holding up their entire nest of spaghetti, mental spaghetti, nonsense, whatever.
Tree of lies. The tree of lies.
The trunk of the tree of lies is itself a lie.
Yeah.
All right. So the first study that I would like to draw your attention to is you can access it on Science Direct in the low bar.
I put it in the low bar.
Yeah, Brian put it in the low bar. Do people care if men don't care about caring? The asymmetry in support for changing gender roles. Now, first of all, I'd like to point out that this title is itself sort of misleading, unless I'm being unable to, understand what they're trying to get at. But it's not that men don't care about caring. It's that people don't care if men are discriminated against in the caring professions.
Right.
And they don't really care about getting men into them. So here are some of the highlights from this report. Gender imbalances are perceived differently for male versus female dominant careers. Stronger support for social change when women versus men are underrepresented. External barriers are thought to constrain gender balance in male-dominated fields. Motivation is thought to constrain gender balance in female-dominated fields. Asymmetrical support for change is predicted by gender distribution, not salary. So essentially what this is saying is that people care about women not being in STEM. They do not care about men not being in the HEED professions. And I'm probably going to have to HEED
I can tell you what that is. It's healthcare, So you guys have heard of the STEM professions, right? Science, technology, engineering, and medicine. But then there's the HEED professions, which tend to be dominated by women, which is healthcare, early education, and domestic roles.
So basically everything that socializes young people into being human beings. Into occupying a space in human society, which of course has no power whatsoever. None. It has no influence on society whatsoever. The process of socializing young people into assuming a role in society, no influence. But so this is showing that people actually care that women are discriminated or allegedly discriminated against in STEM, and they attribute that to discrimination. But when they look at men in healthcare, early education, and domestic roles, and they see that men are not in those roles, they don't attribute that to discrimination. They attribute it to them being lazy and losers and not motivated to do it. So this is a huge counter argument to the idea that society does not care about women or is discriminating against women, preventing them from getting into STEM. And the reason why is because, of course, the patriarchy theory alleges that we live in a society that prefers to benefit men over women. And this is proof that all things equal, people would rather take a science, technology, engineering, and math job and give it to a woman if they could, than do the reverse for men, give men a healthcare, early education, and domestic job. So how do we live in a society that wants to benefit men over women if there's no actual desire to benefit men over women? And here's evidence that we don't. What a surprise. Nobody cares if men don't go into these, frankly, highly socially influential fields. They don't care because they just don't care. They don't want men in them. And they don't care that men are, in many cases, discriminated against in being in them. So that's one. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna like add to that real quick. Not only do we tend to care that there is perceived, inequality in STEM fields, but the M is supposed to stand for mathematics. I said medicine, but I think there's another version of STEM that has two M's. Nonetheless, not only do they not care in the same way, and there's almost probably like no advocacy to push men into heat fields. In some of those fields, the men are actually kind of kept out. If you look at education, for example, there is an anti-male sort of like culture in education because men are seen as predatory, especially now with the Me Too movement and everything. I think it's even harder for men to go into education. I have a friend who is a high school teacher, and he has said that there are men who have, who don't want to go into education anymore, who have quit their jobs, or they've like changed to change their schools to like go into higher education because they want to avoid accusations of predatory behavior. This is one of the reasons why, especially in early education, it's like really dominated by women. So it's not just that men are not interested and there's no advocacy for them, but there's also like kind of like a scary miasma around getting into education as a man in that specific instance.
I remember a while back I was sort of doing an investigation of the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization. And what's interesting is that the Big Brothers, they're having a great deal of time getting any men to volunteer to help young men and boys and young men. And they actually found a type of commercial campaign that really helped, which showed young men and our boys in a position where they had need of an adult male role model. But because that campaign, even though it was really successful in getting young men interested in taking part in the program, and men interested in taking part of the program, mentoring boys and young men, they pulled it because they were afraid showing a young or a boy in need, or a boy in vulnerable, in need of a male role model, would somehow attract sexual predators to the program. So instead of challenging that kind of perception, or even challenging the assumption that this would attract, rather than attracting young or men mentors who wanted to help vulnerable boys, they pulled the whole ad, and they chose to run ads that they knew wouldn't get any attention or any interest. And they basically chose to suicide for their organization because fewer and fewer men became mentors, because they wouldn't advertise them in such a way that any man really wanted to take part. And they all did that based on the fact that they thought this commercial might attract sexual predators. So what's interesting is that an entire organization devoted to mentoring boys is willing to just silently disappear rather than take any kind of risk in getting a Me Too, essentially. The the only Me Too that of a male victim that is really considered at all important. Um,
Mm.
when you can destroy any kind of a system of mentorship between older men and younger men. But so yeah, that's essentially it. The fear of an accusation, the fear of potentially attracting a predator, caused them to basically close their doors. And this is the situation now because of this incredible, unbelievable, and endless endless demonization of male sexuality
Yeah.
and the continuous and totally totally inappropriate and screwed up collective guilt that's being placed on men for the actions of a few predators. And of course, we don't even recognize female predators. They don't even exist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, it's a funny world, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, we can't call out the people who are actually doing this. Oh yes, we can. It's feminists.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, this is a resource, guys. So you guys, the links are there in case you need to use them. Think of it that way. I know that in a way you're learning things you already knew, but this is, sort of solidifies this, right? It's good to see
It's
that
a resource stream.
yeah, it's a resource stream, but this is a study that you can actually look at so you know what's happening. I know we gotta get through the rest, so we don't want to spend too much time, but now that I'm thinking about this sort of attack on male mentorship, I wonder if that's not something that had been going on with the Boy Scouts for a really long time. Because I know that like these kind of like when I was a really young kid, there was a boys club and I was a member of it for 1 year. I went and we did like camping trips and stuff like that. And it was like a publicly funded thing. It didn't cost me anything. It didn't cost my family anything. So I think they ran mostly on donations and some public funding. But the boys clubs are gone. They're non-existent now. And I wonder if there wasn't some way to, create the same kind of ugly rumor around male role models or male mentorship relationships with young men that was like intentional. I don't know. There's no evidence of that, but just something I'm thinking about. So
All right. So
all
why
right,
don't we take a look at
the next thing.
yeah, the next thing. Now, I don't know if I want to go necessarily in sequential order. So I would like to look at a new study explores a strange paradox. In countries that empower women,
This one.
they're they're less likely to choose math and science professions. And I want you to throw that graph up that shows the comparison between the country, its score on gender
um
equality.
this one. Women among STEM
Yes,
graduates. Yeah.
yeah, that's the one. That's the one. Okay, so we have Finland and Norway who score really, really high on gender equality and really low on women in STEM. And then we have Tunisia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, Algeria,
Right here.
Vietnam, Indonesia, Albania, Macedonia, Italy, Greece, Mexico. The ones that I'm mentioning, they score higher in terms of female graduates in STEM. Is that not unbelievable? So there is an inverse relationship between what feminists consider equality and women going into STEM.
Yeah, they call this the Norwegian paradox, where the harder, and this is something that Peterson has brought up and others, the countries that work the hardest to create gender equality by artificially propping up women under the assumption of an oppressive patriarchy, the more likely those women, once they have the freedom to choose whatever they want as a career, the more likely they are not to go into STEM. Whereas the countries where things are I guess you could say more dire, and they don't have the luxury of seeking, of putting together these feminist organizations that work on equality, the more likely women go into careers like STEM because they're trying to get whatever they can. It's like, I think, out of necessity.
And I think there's even a darker undercurrent going here that I'll point out later. But I just wanted to describe my own experience. When I took undergraduate, I was in an undergraduate degree in computer science before I discovered that while I like math, I do not like programming. The distribution of women in that field was almost entirely women from subcontinent India, Asian women, and surprisingly Muslim women. So my own experience, I think there was one or two other white women in there. My own experience as a woman going into computer science is that if they took Finland, Sweden, Ireland, Netherlands, well, probably there isn't a huge population there, but those countries, USA, Australia, Canada, if they took the computer science graduates from those countries and took away the women who were from what we consider to be more oppressive patriarchal cultures, that number of women among STEM graduates would decline even more. So you would probably see Finland, Norway, Sweden, USA, Australia, Canada, they're going from about, 22.5% women, percentage of women in STEM fields to probably hovering around 2 to 3% if you took away the women in those countries who are originating from these more quote unquote oppressive patriarchal cultures. So this is actually artificially inflating the numbers of women who are part of a culture of gender equality that actually go into STEM fields in Western nations. I just wanted to point that out. It's actually worse than this.
Yeah.
Worse. The reality is worse than this. So you can basically say that if you take a woman and you expose her to what feminists consider to be gender equality, you will take a woman who might be, I don't know, 100% likely to go into a STEM field, and you will drain that down to maybe like 5%. That's what feminism is doing to women in STEM, or at least gender equality, feminist conception of gender equality as expressed in Western cultures. All right. So let's go to the next one, which is women seen as having more ability, men seen as having more agency. Do you have that one?
Let me see here.
It's American psychologist. Gender stereotypes have changed.
Oh,
across
I got it. Wait.
No. Yeah, you got
this one. Carpe, chart of the day, the declining female share of computer science degrees. That one?
Well, you know what? We can cover that one since you got it up. So this is, now we've looked at how computer science degrees are, women in computer science is more common under these oppressive patriarchal quote unquote regimes than in gender neutral feminist Western cultures. So we've looked at that, a cross section around the world. Let's look at it historically. Okay. Yeah, let's do that.
All right, wait. I got this one. This is the long game one that starts from 1970 up into 2018, 2017 is where it looks like it cuts off at.
Yeah. So if you look at this, you can see that while in the 70s, there was less than, I think, 15% of women in STEM.
Yeah, something like 13%.
There was a huge increase up to over 35%.
Yep.
And then progressively in about 1986, so no, wait, it peaked a little bit earlier.
1983.
1983-ish, yeah.
Michael Jackson's Thriller was out, so that's probably got something to do with it.
Yeah, it definitely. Causation or correlation, folks. Okay, so at that point, things started to decline. And what's interesting about the 80s is, of course, the 80s is when we start to see what? We start to see more and more of feminists' notion of gender equality being pushed in universities.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the big expansion happened. So not only do we see that cultures who are more patriarchal, quote unquote patriarchal and oppressive, have more women in STEM, but also as a culture becomes more gender equal, and I'm not exactly sure why it was so low in the 1970s. It may have actually also been
Could have been
just
feminism's, because I noticed that when feminists moved in, they like this is where it goes down. So maybe that was second wave feminism that caused it. And then there was like nothing for a little while, and we had like the Cold War and stuff, and Ronald Reagan. And then I don't know if this applies to the United States or everywhere, so maybe I'm wrong. And then you had like another wave of feminism in the late 80s, early 90s. That was like a big politically correct thing that was going on. So
of course, and this is correlation as opposed to causation. I'd
yeah,
also
yeah.
say that in the 50s, which is when if they were doing pushes in the 50s, in the 70s is probably where you'd start to see the increase in young women. In the 50s, because of the Cold War, they had a whole bunch of like public service announcements that showed science heroes, including women, doing science to advance to make America great, basically. And women really seemed to resonate with that kind of message, and ended up going into the STEM fields more, which is why you see that peak. But then after that, it's too bad we couldn't have continued that message of social responsibility for women. Seems like social responsibility does inspire women to do stuff, but of course, instead, the message we start teaching women is not social responsibility. It's that society owes them because they are, of course, victims of society. And then we start seeing the progressive decline. And the reason why I say that social responsibility was likely one of the reasons that got women into these fields or increased the amount of women is because when you give women an external measuring stick, when you give them a context in which their actions matter, they apply more effort like every other human being.
Mm-hmm.
So when they encounter calculus, women who are like, well, I got to do this for America, are more likely to dig in their heels and actually learn it rather than flounce and apply their grant money to flower weaving. All right.
Underwater
So,
lesbian dance therapy basket weaving. That's what you're trying to say.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You read my mind.
It's a complex field, guys. It's very niche, but
It's
I
very
understand that
intricate.
if you make it to the top, you can actually become a journalist for The Guardian. But anyway, moving on.
So, this is evidence that across the world, those societies that are more patriarchal, quote unquote patriarchal and oppressive,
Mm-hmm.
who have an external standard for women to live up to. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Because that's really what feminists are saying about those cultures. Oh my God, they have an external standard that they hold women to. And then when we applied an external standard, be a science hero for America, to women, they started to go into science. And then when you start to say to them, oh no, you're a victim of society, society owes you, they stop going in. Because to be frank, a lot of this field is very difficult. It does require making an effort beyond your own self-interest. And nobody makes an effort beyond their own self-interest if the only reason they're making an effort is their self-interest. They'll just wander off and do underwater lesbian interpretive dance basket weaving instead. All right.
Therapy,
Yes.
All right. So what do you want to look at next?
One. All right, next one. I want to look at women seen as having more ability, men seen as having more agency. If you take a look at that one, it's the APA one. It's the American Psychological Association. Gender stereotypes have changed. A cross-temporal meta-analysis of U.S. public opinion polls from 1946 to 2018.
I don't know if I have that one. Send me the link to
Really?
that, and I'll put it up on the screen. Yeah, I have the American. I see it. American Psychologist. Right. Gender stereotypes. All right. Got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So this one, it's a cross-temporal analysis.
Oh, don't even bother.
Yeah.
Okay. It's All right. So essentially, what they found, first of all, it's a meta-analysis integrated 16 nationally representative U.S. public opinion polls on gender stereotypes extending from 1946 to 2018. So essentially, they just looked at the public's attitude towards men and women and what they thought about men and women. And what they found is that there was a considerable change in gender relations, especially in women's roles, in polls inquiring about communion, agency, and competence. What's really funny is that they don't include the stuff where the men changed. I guess that's, our patriarchy seems to be really okay with just being like, you know what, we don't need to look at the men's situation.
Yeah.
They're irrelevant. Our patriarchy that's so focused on helping men doesn't ever seem to want to look at them at all. Agency and competence. Respondents indicated whether each trait is more true of women or men, especially true or equally true of both. Women's relative advantage in communion increased over time, but men's relative advantage in agency showed no change. Belief in competence, equality increased over time, along with belief in female superiority among those who had indicated a sex difference in competence. Contemporary gender stereotypes thus convey substantial female advantage in communion and a smaller male advantage in agency, but also gender equality in competence, along with some female advantage. Interpretation emphasizes the origins of gender stereotypes and social roles of women and men. So that's essentially they're explaining where they went to with the interpretation. When the interpretation is basically, well, the roles of women and men are this, therefore that's why the results happened as they did. But this is just an interpretation. It's not necessarily hard evidence. So can you pull up that graph it's, I believe, page 10.
Hold
Yeah.
on. Oh, yeah. I can just scroll down to page 10. It's fine.
Yeah, just scroll down because I think that's going to be a little bit quicker than you trying to get through all your page 10.
There we go.
More.
This is it.
One
No?
more.
Well, so page 11. This one?
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
No,
according to this, it's page 11.
Oh, okay.
Well, blame Adobe Acrobat for that. But yeah, so
blame Adobe. All right. Okay, so what we can see is in communion, which I assume is the ability to be friends with people.
yeah, it's community competency, I guess.
Women and men. And remember, this is not the whole picture. This doesn't include all of the other aspects of being human that men changed or these individuals weren't interested in because there was no change. So just because men had an advantage in the 40s in some of these areas doesn't mean that they had an advantage across board, because there are more traits than in human beings than just communion, agency, competency, intelligence. These are just handpicked by these researchers. But regardless, just keep that in mind as we look at this. Communion, men and women start out about equal, which I'm guessing communion is probably just cooperation, friendliness, being able to and willing to be helpful.
Or maybe some level of exercising social influence to accomplish things or something. I don't know. Like is it about accomplishing goals by, because women do tend to use their networks, right? Friends and colleagues and stuff.
Yeah, that's probably.
But and what we are looking at is not necessarily an actual measure of what women are doing, but we are looking at a measure of what people who are polled believe women are doing.
Actually, this is really simple. Communion orientates, and this is from the actual piece, communion orientates people to others and their well-being. For example, compassionate, warm, expressive, whereas agency orientates people to the self and one's own mastery and goal attainment. For example, ambitious, assertive, competitive.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what we look at here, what we're seeing here is communion, while in the 40s, amazingly, men and women were seen. Isn't that remarkable? Men and women were both seen.
About the same
in communion. So, but men and women were both seen as orientated to others and their well-being, compassionate, warm, and expressive. In the 40s, it was much closer together, and now it's not. Now men are seen as not compassionate, warm, and
at
expressive.
all. Like at hardly. All. Where would they get such an idea about men not being compassionate at all? in the
That's a
last
freaking
70 years.
that's one amazing finding, and I don't even think they mention it much. How that is actually really detrimental to the perception of men, that we now no longer see them really as having a fundamental aspect of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but anyway, let's move on. So communion, women have had a marginal advantage in the 40s, increased to a huge advantage in now.
Yeah.
Competence, men had an advantage in the 40s. Now women do. Intelligence, men had an advantage in the 40s, and now women do, although equality seems to have won out completely on that one. But let's look at agency. What's happened with agency?
Men have stayed
Men,
about the same, but women
men
have
have
gone
stayed
down.
about the same. Women have lost perception of agency. They've lost perception of agency in our society from 1940 to 2020. Isn't that fascinating? Because if you look at this and then you look at the decline in STEM field, maybe the reason why there's a decline in the STEM field is that women have lost a perception of their own agency. And again, agency is defined in this as focusing on the self and one's ability to meet a goal.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think you need when you go into STEM? More than anything.
Yeah.
And incidentally, the bit of recovery that happens in the 2000s for women in STEM, I'm guessing that that's probably immigration from cultures that are more allegedly patriarchal, or cultures like in the 1940s that actually recognize women's agency. So, yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I
The
wonder
more that
if we had I wonder if we weren't working with a different definition for compassion in the 40s as well. Because I know that like words meanings like that they get distorted over time. And I wonder if like men who went to war in the 1940s when they were starting to do this would have been considered compassionate for doing so because it was World War II. I just
yeah.
wonder if that's not a factor because now we wouldn't consider that. We would consider a man who willingly goes to war to protect the people at home. That would be considered by many to be some kind of self-interested bravado thing, right?
Mhm.
Whereas back
Mhm.
then, I think that we would have thought of it like what it was, which is essentially taking immense risk of your, of your body to go and do what you felt was the right thing.
Mhm.
So.
Yeah. But and very true. It how we think about things obviously changes a lot. But what I want to point out is that we call Western cultures, and we look at this. In the 40s, men were seen as more warm, compassionate, and expressive, or as warm, compassionate, expressive as women. Women and men had a smaller gap in perception of agency. Yes, men were seen as more competent and intelligent, but there were likely other positive traits that women were perceived to have that men didn't. We haven't really changed the fact that men and women are perceived differently uh, 80 years later. We've just changed how they're perceived differently. So feminists haven't really changed the fact that there are gender roles. They've just forced one aspect of traditional gender roles to sort of become the main aspect, the overriding, the hegemonic aspect. And that is communion versus agency. So
Mhm.
men or women are seen as far more communicative, so far more orientated to people and their well-being than men, and they're seen as less agentive than they were in the 1940s. So they've created this dichotomy between men and women, this strengthened, like even more strengthened gender dichotomy between men and women. Men are compassionless robots who do. Women are compassionate and also, intelligent, sensitive creatures who are done to.
Mhm.
So feminists haven't challenged gender roles. They've just yoinked the whole process of creating them and have established their own. And these are the gender roles that they've established.
Yep.
And they continue to perpetuate talk about creating the sickness to sell the cure. Of course, the end result of creating a gender role in which men are seen as relentless terminators who can get the job done, and women are seen as these intelligent, yes, but compassionate, unmotivated, acted upon critters that just sort of float through life. The end result of that is that you destroy women's achievement, as proven by the fact that those societies that can maintain women's achievement, maintain an external standard for them, maintain a perception of their agency, and thus maintain achieving women. So when we say that the West is gender equal, what the hell are we even talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, what we've essentially done is we've said, oh, well, whatever feminism does is gender equality. Well, I'm sorry, but would you say whatever a firefighter does is firefighting if you see a firefighter lighting a fire? Oh, he must be fighting a fire. He has a goddamn freaking flamethrower lighting a
Mhm.
freaking barn on fire with napalm, but no, he's actually fighting that. It must be because firefighters, all they ever do is fight fires, right? Feminists, all they ever do is create gender equality because we have defined their actions as gender equality. Well, guess what? This isn't gender equality. This is absurd to call it gender equality. Throw up the decline in female STEM fields. This is
The
what
one from before, this one?
Yeah, this is what feminists call success. They have gotten into everything in the West. They control academia. They control the public perception of gender roles. Control it. And this is what they call success. This is their success. And then they turn around and they show their success. They say that this success proves that they are needed. Like I
Mhm.
said, create the sickness, sell the cure. All right.
Yeah. That's why I believe that, we were just talking about the patriarchy of feminist imagining. I believe the patriarchy is real. I think that feminism creates it. It creates it. It does things in the real world. It affects men and women. And then it also turns around and says, wow, the patriarchy is the enemy while, perpetuating it. So they
Can you
are the
can you
patriarchy.
can you throw up the loss of agency? Like, because that's really what we're looking at. Men have lost that compassion, that sense that,
This one?
yeah, yeah. You see that? Do you see that red line going down, down, down for women? That is women being trotted off into a harem, friendos. Because eventually, if you decrease the perception of women's agency to such a degree, eventually it will make sense to people that women need to be in walled gardens, protected from the robotic terminators that are men. This is the construction of a Bronze Age harem culture. But what I wanted to point out is that feminism is not challenging gender roles. It's
Mm-hmm.
just reestablishing its own, and its own are unbelievably awful.
Yeah.
Do men want to exist in a world where they're seen as emotionless robots? No. Do women want to exist in a world where there's no freaking perception that their actions matter at all? I don't think so. But it's what we got. So, want to go to the last one, which
Sure.
is
One from Australia, from a group called Beta. You can't make this shit up. The jokes tell themselves. Behavioral Economics Team of the Australian Government. That's what it stands for. Going blind to see more clearly. Unconscious bias in Australian public service shortlisting processes. This one was really interesting too. But what do you want to say about it?
I want to point out that this is another thing that utterly disproves feminist patriarchy theory. It utterly disproves it.
Mm-hmm.
People do not discriminate in favor of men. They discriminate in favor of women and minorities. In fact,
Sure do.
the people who put this forward, who did this study, wanted to make sure to maintain that discrimination. It's like, how is a society then in every one of its effects prefers to benefit women over men. A society that prefers to benefit men over women. Every single possible avenue of benefit that a person can get, whether it be government services, additional tax to pay for the housing and healthcare, and interest in resolving human ills, only targeting one group, like violence. Violence targets everybody, but we only care about it because when it targets women. Rape, we only care about when it targets women. Domestic violence, we only care about when it targets women.
Mhm.
How is it possible that in every single issue that you could possibly think that a human being could be subject to, we only care if it hurts women, and then turn around and say we live in a damn society that privileges men over women? Why? Where?
Yep.
Where do we choose to benefit men over women? We don't choose to benefit men over women in STEM. We don't choose to benefit men over women in any other form of employment. In fact, we practice and laud ourselves for practicing discrimination against men while expecting men to get a job to be sexually desirable and socially desirable in a way that we do not expect of women. We actively discriminate against them for jobs. We actively discriminate against them for government services. We actively discriminate against them for health dollars. We actively discriminate against them when it comes to giving them help for social ills that both women and men suffer from. And most people would rather see a man take a bullet for a woman than the reverse. They would rather cheat a man than the reverse. They would rather see a man in the gutter than a woman. In every conceivable circumstance, people would rather benefit women than men. And the cumulative effect of this is not only do we not live in a patriarchy that wants to benefit men over women, but the cumulative effect of this on women is that they don't achieve. Because if you give constant handouts to someone and treat them like a child, they will remain so. And then feminism turns around and looks at that lack of achievement and says, what?
Men
A
did
wage
that.
gap.
Yep.
A wage gap. Male privilege. Patriarchy. You know what male privilege is? It's the privilege of sacrificing yourself for a goal or an organization. The privilege of learning self-sacrifice. It's like saying that athletes have athlete privilege. No, they just do the work. Okay.
Yep.
I'm done.
All right. Well, I just want to show you guys what the findings were from this study, because I thought this was really interesting, although not surprising. Over 2,100, this was a study of public service in Australia. Over 2,100 public servants from 14 agencies participated in this trial. They completed an exercise in which they shortlisted applicants for a hypothetical senior role in their agency. Participants were randomly assigned to receive application materials for candidates in a standard form or in de-identified form, which is with information about candidate gender, race, and ethnicity removed. We found that public servants engaged in positive, not negative discrimination. So positive discrimination, which is the good discrimination, that favors women and minorities. This is what they found. Participants were 2.9% more likely to shortlist females and 3.2% less likely to shortlist males when they were identifiable compared to when they were de-identified. So the de-identification is like the control, so they can see the difference. Minority males were 5.8% more likely to be shortlisted, and minority females were 8.6% more likely to be shortlisted when identifiable compared to when they are de-identified. The positive discrimination was strongest for Indigenous female candidates, who were 22.2% more likely to be shortlisted when identifiable compared to when they were de-identified. Interestingly, male reviewers displayed markedly more positive discrimination in favor of minority candidates than did females, which means the men were more likely to discriminate positively. And reviewers age 40 plus displayed much stronger affirmative action in favor for both women and minorities than did younger ones. Overall, the results indicate the need for caution when moving towards blind recruitment processes in the Australian public service, as de-identification may frustrate efforts aimed at promoting diversity. So they're saying that they have to essentially be mindful that they don't that they don't like do this blind, like don't that de-identification could frustrate efforts aimed at promoting diversity, i.e. that you should be hiring people based on their gender and their skin color is what they took away from this. It's crazy. But obviously this is stuff that we knew. Still interesting.
Also debunking. Well, we didn't. Yeah. The thing is that what I want to do is bring these resources to people so you can use them. Because, quite frankly, patriarchy, I was about to say patriarchy theory. It's not even a theory. It has no predictive value. Mm-hmm. Patriarchy superstition. Feminists would like to think that their superstition is a religion. Patriarchy superstition has no basis in science. It is extremely easy to either prove or disprove. All you need to do is do a cross-section of people in society and ask them, would you prefer to benefit men in whatever situation? Would you prefer to see a man take a bullet versus a woman? If you had to shoot a man or a woman, which would you shoot? If you had to save a starving man or a starving woman, which would you feed? And keep going down the line. And you could, using that, you could prove or disprove if we live in a society where it is a hegemonic or near universal belief that we should benefit men over women. And here is more evidence that that is not the case. Nobody wants to benefit men over women. Nobody. We don't even want to do that. We just want to see men brought to the table. So it's mind-boggling that people would accept something so counterintuitive as feminist theory. And the reason why they do is because it's, in a way, not counterintuitive. Because people don't want to see this about themselves. They don't want to see themselves as unjust or unequal. I mean, the cultures in the West, they sure as hell want to see themselves as morally superior to the United Arab Emirates and Turkey. So they don't want to look at this. Yep. And they don't want to recognize it. So but this is evidence, uncontrovertible evidence, that it is ridiculous to assert that we live in a society that prefers to benefit men over women in the field of public service or even STEM or anywhere. So that's, I'm good.
All right.
I hope you guys find it useful, and thank you for your kind attention.
Okay, so we'll wrap this up then. Yes?
Yeah. I might do an announcement. Honey Badger Radio is going to be hosting a screening of Erasing Family in Saskatoon in conjunction with CAFE, the Canadian Association for Equality's national initiative to host these screenings. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned to this channel. I'll give you more information. If you're in Saskatoon or you have the ability to get there, please consider going and seeing this family. It's looking like it'd be seeing this film, Erasing Family. It's by the director, Ginger Gentile, and she was the co-director of Erasing Dad, the film that made family bond obstruction front page news and drove legislative and court reform in Argentina. The film helped reunite families, and Erasing Families seeks to replicate that on a global scale. And it follows young adults fighting to reunite with their broken families. So that sounds like it's going to be a bit of a tearjerker, actually. So if you want to learn about more information about that, please keep following us, and I will give you it as things develop.
Here you go.
All
right. So I'm going to wrap up the show. Thanks, guys, for coming on and checking out our video here, Debunking Feminism, the truth about initiatives to get more women into STEM fields. Please give this video a like if you could. Also, be sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I see some new faces in the chat. And hit the bell for notifications, because it's the only way you'll know for sure that our videos have gone live or have gone up. Even then, it's not really a guarantee, so maybe bookmark
Sort of hit
our
and miss.
YouTube channel. Yeah, it's sort of hit and miss, but do it anyways. You know, join the notification squad. And also leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about this. All the links are in the low bar. Use them, save them, maybe even like copy them in case they get pulled down. Who knows, right? So with that said, I'm gonna wrap up the show. Thanks guys for coming on. Thanks, Allison, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.